The desert world was silent. Only the wind carried dust across the broken rocks. John, a human explorer, walked slowly with a heavy pack on his back. He was tired. His team had already gone ahead, but he stayed behind to search for water. His boots crunched against the sand, his eyes scanning the horizon. This world felt empty, but deep inside, John had a strange feeling that something was watching him. He stopped near a dry tree, breathing hard. Then he heard it, a soft sound like a weak cry. At first he thought it was the wind, but the sound came again, low and desperate. He turned his head, and behind a rock he saw two glowing eyes. They were small, frightened, and full of hunger. John moved closer, carefully, his hand near his sidearm just in case. When he came around the rock, he froze. It was not a normal animal, not something he had seen before. A small alien cub, thin as bones, its fur dirty, its ribs showing with each shallow breath. The creature looked at him with both fear and need. Its claws were too weak to fight, its body trembling with starvation. For a moment, John felt torn. This was not his mission. This was not his problem. But the look in those glowing eyes hit something deep inside him. He remembered Earth, stray dogs in the street. Hungry kids during the war. He had seen those same eyes before. Eyes that only asked for food, not pity. Slowly, John sat down on the sand. He opened his pack and pulled out a ration bar. The smell made the cub lift its head, ears twitching, nose quivering. John broke a piece and placed it on the ground, then pushed it closer. The cub sniffed, hesitated, then snatched it with surprising speed. It chewed weakly, but each bite gave it strength. John smiled faintly, breaking more pieces and feeding it bit by bit. The cub inched closer, no longer afraid, its eyes softening. It even let out a small sound, something like a purr mixed with a growl. The sound was strange, but it did not scare John. Instead, it warmed him. Minutes passed, and John almost forgot where he was. The desert, the danger, the mission, all faded. It was only him and this fragile creature fighting to live another day. When the ration bar was finished, the cub licked his fingers. Its tiny tongue rough but gentle. John laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You're just hungry, aren't you?" he whispered, though it could not understand. Then, something unexpected happened. The cub stood on shaky legs. Its tail flicking, it gave him one last look, then turned and ran, not in fear, but with purpose. John blinked, confused. Why did it leave so suddenly after finally finding food? The silence returned, but it was heavier now. John's instincts told him something was wrong. The cub had not run away. It had gone to call someone. He rose to his feet, scanning the dunes. The sun was falling, shadows stretching long and dark. The wind carried a new sound, low and distant. A sound that made his heart tighten. Heavy footsteps. Slow but certain. The cub had disappeared into the rocks ahead. John's eyes followed, and there he saw it. Between the shifting shadows, a larger shape moved. Tall, powerful, glowing eyes just like the cub's, but sharper, more dangerous. The air grew tense. John realized what he had done. He had fed the child of something much bigger, something that was now coming for him. His hand instinctively moved to his weapon, but deep inside, he felt this was not a fight he could win with bullets. The creature was close now, its outline becoming clear. Muscles rippled under striped fur. Long claws glinted in the fading sun. And its eyes locked straight on him. Not with hunger for food, but with a different hunger. A mix of fury and mystery. John's breath caught in his throat. The cub had returned, standing proudly beside the larger figure, its small head tilted. As if introducing him, John stood frozen, sweat dripping down his neck. The desert was no longer empty. It was alive. And in front of him was no ordinary predator. This was the cub's mother, and she was more than just a beast. The wind grew colder as the shadow stepped into the open. John's heart pounded, each beat echoing in his chest like a drum. He had seen predators before, but nothing like this. The creature was massive, taller than any human, its body sleek but powerful, striped with dark patterns that shimmered under the fading light. Her long tail swayed slowly behind her, every movement full of control, full of danger. Her glowing golden eyes locked on John. They were sharp, almost human-like, but filled with something wild. Not just anger, intelligence, suspicion, and a strange sense of challenge. She opened her mouth slightly, sharp fangs glinting, a low growl rumbling from her throat. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind was quiet, as if the world itself waited for her next move. The cub stood beside her, rubbing its small body against her leg. It made soft sounds as if trying to explain what had happened. Its little paw pointed toward John. The mother's gaze shifted to the cub for a moment, then back to the human. Her eyes narrowed as if asking silently, "What did you do to my child?" John did not move. He knew running would be useless, and lifting his weapon might trigger instant death. So he stood his ground, forcing his breath to steady. He raised his empty hand slowly, palms open. "I fed your cub," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. The words were useless, but his calm voice, his steady eyes, they carried meaning. The tigress tilted her head slightly, her ears twitching, her growl softened, but her muscles remained tense. She took one heavy step forward, claws sinking into the sand. The ground trembled under her weight. John's throat went dry. She was close enough now that he could see details. Her fur shining like polished bronze, her face sharp yet strangely beautiful. She was no mindless beast, she was something far more dangerous. The cub yelped softly and pushed closer to her leg. Then it ran forward suddenly, straight to John. The little creature pressed itself against his boots. Purring weakly, John looked down, shocked, then back up at the tigress. Her eyes widened just slightly, as she saw her cub choose him for a second. The desert silence was broken by nothing but the cub's innocent sound. The tigress let out a deep, echoing growl, not of attack but of warning. John understood it as clearly as if she had spoken. "If you harm what is mine, you die." Still, there was something else in her stare. Confusion, maybe even curiosity. Why would her cub, a creature born of her blood, cling to this strange human? She lowered her head slowly, her long whiskers twitching as she sniffed the air near him. The scent of human, metal, sweat, and rations filled her senses, but also the faint trace of her cub's trust. Her nose came so close that John could feel the heat of her breath on his skin. Every instinct told him to step back, to run, but he stood frozen. Forcing himself not to flinch, the cub chirped softly. Pressing closer against his leg, the tigress's growl faded into a low rumble. Almost like a sigh, she pulled her head back. Studying him with narrowed eyes, John felt a strange shift. Her gaze was no longer just hostile. It carried weight, like she was measuring him, testing him, not just as prey but as something else entirely. The desert sun slipped lower, painting the sky in blood red and gold. The tigress finally straightened her body, towering over both of them. Her claws dug into the sand once more as she circled around John. Every step was slow, deliberate. She was inspecting him like a queen deciding the fate of a stranger in her court. John turned carefully, never letting her out of his sight. The cub followed happily, unaware of the heavy tension in the air. For the first time, John noticed faint scars across the tigress's shoulders. She had fought many battles before. She was a survivor, a leader, maybe even a protector of more than just her cub. When she finally stopped, she let out a sharp growl that echoed through the rocks. It was not a sound of war, but a declaration. The cub bounced in response, its small body excited. John didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. She had made a decision. The tigress turned away slightly, but her golden eyes flicked back to him one last time. There was still danger, still warning, but also recognition. As if she had decided he was not an enemy. At least, not yet. The cub tugged at John's boot with tiny claws, urging him to follow, and against all logic, against every survival instinct, he took one step forward. The tigress did not attack, she allowed it, though her tail swished sharply in warning. In that strange desert under the dying sun, John realized something important. He had not just fed a starving cub, he had crossed a line. Now, he was entangled in the life of its mother. A tigress alien who was more than predator, more than beast, and whatever this meant. It was only the beginning. The air between them was sharp, like a stretched bowstring ready to snap. John stood with his hand still open, his heart racing. The alien tigress circled him slowly, her tail moving side to side, her golden eyes fixed on him. She was not attacking, but she was not calm either. Every step of hers was a test of his fear, his strength, his worth. The cub clung to John's boot. Rubbing its small body against him, it purred softly, as if begging its mother to understand. But the tigress's low growl filled the desert again. John could feel it vibrate in his chest, heavy and dangerous. It was a warning, one that told him he was one wrong move away from death. John's instinct screamed at him to reach for his weapon, But another instinct, deeper and stranger, told him not to. If he pulled the gun, he would be nothing but prey. Instead, he knelt slowly, his palms still open, and looked at the cub. "Easy, little one," he whispered, though his throat was dry. The cub responded with a happy chirp. Leaning closer, the tigress paused, her head tilting. Her eyes narrowed at the strange gesture. Why would a human kneel before her cub? Her ears twitched, her sharp teeth bared slightly. She stepped closer until her shadow covered him completely. John could smell her now, the wild scent of fur, dust, and something sharp like iron. His breath grew shallow, but he did not move. The cub suddenly climbed onto his lap, curling against his chest. Its small claws pressed through his jacket. But it did not hurt. It was seeking warmth. Safety. John held still, not daring to push it away. He could feel its heartbeat against him. Fast but steadying, the tigress froze at the sight, her growl dying mid-throat. Her cub was resting on a stranger, trusting him completely. The tigress's instincts clashed inside her. One voice screamed, "Kill the intruder, protect your blood." Another voice whispered, "The cub has chosen him, why?" Her tail lashed the sand, claws carving deep lines into the ground. She stepped so close her whiskers brushed his cheek. Her hot breath washed over his skin. John shut his eyes for half a second, ready for pain, but instead of biting, she only sniffed him deeply. Every scent, every trace of his journey burned into her mind. Her body trembled with conflict. This human smelled wrong, alien, metallic, not of her world, but he also smelled of her cub. Of food, of survival. She growled again, but this time it was uncertain. Her instincts did not know whether to kill or accept. John opened his eyes slowly and whispered, "I don't mean harm." His voice was low, steady, almost like a growl of his own. The tigress blinked, her ears flattening for a moment. She could not understand the words, but the tone. The tone was calm, strong, not begging. Not weak, it surprised her. The cub purred louder. Stretching its small paw toward her, it touched John's chest, then turned its head and made a strange sound toward its mother. A pleading cry, innocent yet commanding. The tigress's golden eyes softened just slightly. For the first time, she lowered her head not in threat but in thought. Still, instincts were not easily silenced. Her body tensed again, as if ready to strike. John's soldiers in the distance raised their rifles. One sharp trigger pull and the desert would turn red. John lifted his hand sharply, signaling them to hold fire. "Don't!" he shouted, his voice echoing. The soldiers froze, confused, but John knew. Bullets would not solve this. Bullets would only bring war. The tigress heard his shout. Her ears flicked back, her eyes darting to the soldiers. Her growl returned, this time louder, aimed at them. Sand sprayed as she stamped her claws. The ground shook with her fury. The soldiers' hands tightened on their rifles again. But the cub leapt from John's lap and stood between them all. Its small body trembling, but its cry was clear. It was protecting both sides. Begging for peace, the sight froze everyone. Even the tigress. She stared at her cub. At the bravery in its tiny frame, a mother's instinct surged, protect, defend, cherish. But the cub had made a choice. And her eyes, when they returned to John, were no longer filled with pure fury. They carried confusion, and a spark of something else, respect, maybe even trust. Her growl faded, replaced by a heavy rumble deep in her chest. Not friendly, not safe, but no longer the sound of death. It was something different, an uneasy truce. John exhaled for the first time in minutes. He stood slowly, the cub climbing back into his arms. The tigress's eyes followed every move. But she did not strike. The desert night finally fell, stars burning above them. The strange standoff ended without blood. But John knew this was not peace. It was only the first step in a dangerous dance. The tigress had not accepted him fully. Her instincts still burned with warning. And his instincts whispered too. He had entered a bond with something powerful, unpredictable, and once instincts clash, nothing is ever the same. The desert night stretched wide and endless. Stars sharp like silver blades in the sky. John stood still, the cub in his arms purring softly. The tigress mother remained a few steps away, her golden eyes never leaving him. She was silent now, but her silence carried weight. It was not surrender, it was judgment, waiting, deciding. John's soldiers whispered nervously in the distance. "Sir, what's the call?" one asked, his rifle trembling in the dark. But John did not answer. Every instinct told him this was no ordinary encounter. This was something older, deeper, a law of survival he had stumbled into. He felt it in his chest, like he had already crossed a line that could never be undone. The tigress finally moved, her tail slashing the sand. Her powerful body lowered slightly as she let out a deep rumble. It was not a growl of threat, it was a sound like a command. The cub squirmed in John's arms, chirping as if answering. Then it wriggled free, leaping down to its mother. She bent her head and touched her nose to the cub's fur. But her eyes never broke away from John. A strange ritual unfolded in that silence. The cub pressed against her, then turned back to him. It chirped again and again. As if calling him forward, John hesitated, then took one slow step closer. His boots sank into the cool sand. Every muscle in his body screamed with caution, but something deeper pushed him on. The tigress lowered her head once more. This time, her claws dug deep lines into the sand, and then she spoke, not words he could understand, but sounds layered with meaning. Her voice was deep, harsh, yet oddly beautiful. The desert echoed with it. John's skin prickled. Though the language was alien, his gut understood. A debt has been made. You fed what is mine, now you belong to us. John's heart skipped a beat. His soldiers shifted uneasily, muttering, "What the hell did she just say?" But John understood in his bones. It was a life bargain, a bond sealed in her culture. To feed the cub was to tie himself to its mother. Whether he wanted it or not, he shook his head slightly, whispering under his breath, "This can't be real." But the tigress stepped closer, her golden eyes glowing like fire in the night. She stopped just inches from him, towering above. Her breath washed across his face, hot and sharp. Her gaze carried a weight that felt ancient, unbreakable. She lifted one massive claw and pressed it into the sand between them. A mark, a sign, a symbol of the bargain. John swallowed hard, his voice steady but low. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. But deep down, he knew choice was no longer his. The cub squeaked happily, rubbing against both of them. It was as if it had declared him part of the family. The tigress growled low, a sound that trembled in his bones. She was not asking, she was telling. This bond was law. One of John's soldiers raised his rifle, whispering, "We can end this now, sir." But John lifted his hand sharply, his voice iron. "No one fires." The soldier froze, eyes wide. John's gaze stayed locked on the tigress. He knew pulling the trigger would not just kill, it would ignite a storm none of them could survive. The tigress leaned closer, sniffing him once more. Her nose brushed his shoulder, then his chest. Her claws tapped the sand. Steady, powerful, and then she pulled back, her tail swishing. Her growl faded into something else, a strange rumble, low and almost approving. She had accepted the bond, but she was also warning him, betray it. And his life was hers. The desert wind rose. Carrying the scent of dust and danger, John finally exhaled. Realizing how tightly his chest had been locked, he muttered under his breath, "A dangerous bargain." Because that's what it was. He had not only gained the cub's trust, he had gained its mother's claim. The cub bounded between them happily, unaware of the heavy weight in the air. It pawed at John's boot, then at its mother's claw. The tigress bent her head, brushing her nose against the little one. But her eyes kept flicking back to John, possessive, sharp, unyielding. John felt the truth sink deep into him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. He had become part of something greater, something dangerous, a family bound by instinct, debt, and alien law. And though his mind screamed against it, a strange part of his heart whispered, maybe this bond could not be broken. The night grew darker, the stars burning brighter. John stood there, his soldiers silent behind him. The tigress's golden eyes glowed in the dark, and the cub purred, pressed between them both. The bargain was sealed, and from this moment forward, his fate was no longer his alone. It belonged to the cub, and to the tigress mother who had claimed him. The desert dawn came with soft light, painting the sky in red and gold. John had not slept, his body stiff from standing watch all night. Beside him, the cub lay curled against his boot, breathing slow and steady, and only a few steps away, the tigress mother rested, her massive body stretched across the sand. Even in sleep, her ears twitched, her claws half buried, her tail flicking from time to time. She was never fully at rest, always alert, always ready. John's soldiers had retreated further into the rocks. They did not dare come closer, not with the tigress lying so near. They whispered among themselves, calling her monster, predator, nightmare. But John felt something different. looking at her in the rising light. He saw not only danger, he saw scars carved into her fur, marks of battles survived. She was more than beast, she was survivor, protector, leader. When the cub stirred awake, it climbed onto John's lap without hesitation. It yawned, showing tiny sharp teeth, then curled against his chest with a happy purr. John chuckled softly, though his voice carried tiredness. "You're too trusting, little one," he muttered. But deep down, he didn't push the cub away. Its warmth against him felt strangely comforting, something he had not felt since Earth, the comfort of family. The tigress opened her golden eyes at that moment. Her gaze fell on the sight of her cub pressed against John. Her ears flicked back, and for a second, her chest rumbled with a low growl. But then she watched closely. She saw how gently John's hands stayed at his sides, not holding, not forcing. The cub had chosen this on its own. Her growl faded, replaced with heavy silence. Hours passed, and John tried to continue his mission. He collected samples from the rocks, checked his equipment, but everywhere he went, the cub followed, its tiny paws leaving prints in the sand beside his larger boots. Sometimes it tripped and fell, but it always bounced back up with determination. John found himself smiling more than once, something he hadn't done in a long time. The tigress followed too, her presence like a shadow. She never strayed far, watching his every move. Sometimes she growled low when John picked up a strange tool. Sometimes her ears twitched when he bent too close to her cub. It was clear she did not fully trust him yet, but she was watching, learning, testing. At midday, John shared another ration bar with the cub. This time, he broke a piece and tossed it toward the tigress. She did not take it immediately. Her golden eyes narrowed. Her ears angled back. For a moment it looked like she would refuse, but then slowly she reached out. Her sharp teeth closed around the food, and though her gaze stayed locked on him, she ate. The soldiers watching from afar could not believe it. She took food from him, one whispered in shock. John ignored them, his focus only on the tigress. He knew this was not just eating, this was another step. A step in something fragile and dangerous. Trust. As the sun dipped lower, the desert grew cold again. The cub crawled into John's jacket for warmth. Its small body trembling, John held still, letting it press close. He whispered quietly, "You're a fighter, aren't you?" The cub purred in reply. The tigress watched, her golden eyes glowing in the fading light. This time she did not growl. Instead, she lowered her head onto her paws. For the first time, she allowed herself to rest while her cub lay with him. The night was quieter, the stars sharper, but the peace did not last. A distant howl rose from the rocks. Another predator, larger, hungry. The cub tensed, pressing tighter against John's chest. The tigress shot up instantly, her body rigid, her growl fierce. Her eyes scanned the horizon, tail lashing like a whip. The sound grew closer, echoing through the dunes. John's soldiers panicked, raising their rifles, but John stayed still, his hand stroking the cub softly to calm it. The tigress stepped forward, her body between them and the sound. Her growl deepened, carrying both warning and challenge, and in that moment, John realized something important. She was not just protecting her cub, she was protecting him too. The howls faded into the distance. Whatever predator had approached decided not to risk her fury. Silence returned, heavy but safe. The tigress looked back at John, her golden eyes fierce yet softened at the edges. For the first time, her instincts and his aligned. Both wanted the cub safe. Both wanted survival. John exhaled slowly, realizing the truth. This was no longer chance, no longer accident. This was a bond growing stronger each moment. A bond between human and beast, a bond sealed not just by food, but by trust, by danger, by instinct. As the cub drifted back into sleep against his chest, John whispered softly, almost to himself, "Looks like I'm part of this family now." The tigress heard, her ears twitching. Her growl was low, almost like agreement, but her eyes warned him still. "A bond with me is no gift, it is a burden, a claim, a test." The desert stars glowed above. The human, the cub, and the tigress sat together, the bond between them fragile but undeniable. And though John did not know what tomorrow would bring, he knew this truth. The growing bond was only the beginning of something far greater, and far more dangerous. The desert had grown quiet after the night's danger, but peace was never meant to last by morning. The cub played happily in the sand near John's boots. while the Tigress mother watched from the shade of a tall rock. Her golden eyes sharp, she had begun to allow John's presence, but not his place. He was still an outsider, and the tribe would never forget it. That afternoon the ground shook with heavy steps. Not the sound of prey, but of hunters from the ridge above. Shadows appeared, 3 tall alien warriors, their bodies striped with scars, their armor painted in black and red. They carried long spears made of bone and steel. Their eyes burned with challenge as they descended into the valley. The Tigress mother lifted her head, her growl rolling like thunder. But she did not move forward. Instead, she stayed back, her tail swishing as if waiting, testing. John frowned, his hand reaching instinctively toward his weapon. "What's happening?" one of his soldiers whispered nervously, but John already understood this wasn't an ambush, it was a trial. One of the warriors pointed his spear at John. He shouted in a harsh alien tongue. John didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. "Prove yourself or die." The cub chirped in protest, pressing against John's leg. But the Tigress mother did nothing to stop the warriors. Her eyes glowed with a strange light, half warning, half expectation. She wanted to see what he would do. This was the test, the trial by fire. If he failed, he was nothing but prey. If he succeeded, he would be something more. John stepped forward slowly, leaving his rifle behind. He did not want to fight with bullets. It would mean nothing to them. He unstrapped the combat knife from his belt, its blade glinting in the sun. The alien warriors growled in approval. Circling him, they wanted strength, not machines. They wanted spirit, not just survival. The first warrior lunged. Spear flashing, John sidestepped. Sand spraying beneath his boots, the spear cut past his arm. Almost grazing him, he turned sharply, grabbing the shaft and yanked. The warrior stumbled forward. John slammed his elbow into the alien's chest. Knocking him back, the second warrior roared. Swinging his spear in a wide arc, John ducked, rolling across the sand. The cub squeaked loudly, watching in fear. The Tigress mother did not move, her eyes followed every motion. This was his fight alone. The warrior charged again. John kicked up sand, blinding him for a second. He used the moment, slamming his knife against the shaft of the spear. It cracked but did not break. The warrior hissed, baring sharp teeth. John felt his heart racing, every instinct on fire. This was not a game, this was survival by pure will. The third warrior joined, trapping him from behind. John spun, his knife ready. The spear came fast, but he dropped low. The blade slashed upward, cutting across the warrior's arm. Dark blood sprayed, the alien growled in pain. The crowd of soldiers in the distance gasped, but the Tigress mother rumbled low, almost approving. The first warrior recovered and struck again. John barely dodged, his shoulder burning from a shallow cut. His lungs heaved, sweat dripping down his face, but something inside him would not let him fall. He had fought on Earth. He had fought in wars. This was no different, except here no one would save him. He remembered the cub's trusting eyes. He remembered the tigress's unyielding stare. And in that moment he found his strength. He roared, human, raw, primal, and charged forward. The warriors did not expect it. John slammed into the second one, tackling him to the ground. He wrestled the spear free and snapped it across his knee. The sharp point now his weapon. He rose fast, slashing at the first warrior. The blade cut across his chest, leaving a deep mark. The alien staggered back, growling. The third warrior stepped forward again, but hesitated. John's eyes burned with fire, his body trembling but unbroken. He looked less like prey and more like predator. The valley grew silent. The Tigress mother finally stood, her massive body moving closer. She looked at the wounded warriors, then at John. Her growl filled the air, deep, powerful, final. The warriors lowered their heads. Pulling back, they had seen enough. The trial was over. John dropped the broken spear. Breathing hard, the cub rushed to him. Pressing against his leg with happy chirps, John bent down, patting its head. He looked up and found the tigress staring at him. Her golden eyes no longer burned with suspicion alone. They carried something new, acknowledgement, maybe even pride. For the first time, she stepped closer without growling. Her massive head lowered until her whiskers brushed his arm. It was not affection, not yet, it was recognition. A silent admission. You fought, you survived, you belong. John exhaled, his chest still heaving. The trial by fire had ended, but deep inside, he knew. This was not victory. This was only the beginning of a bond forged in blood and danger. a bond that would test him again and again, and perhaps one day would cost him everything. The desert was no longer silent. Smoke rose in the distance. Black against the red horizon, John stood at the edge of the valley. His body still sore from the trial. Beside him the cub pressed close, its small eyes wide with worry, and behind them, the tigress mother growled low, her ears sharp, her tail lashing. Danger was coming, not from beasts but from enemies. The alien tribe had been hunted for months by invaders, ruthless raiders who wanted their land, their strength, their cubs for profit, and now, their ships had landed beyond the dunes, metal beasts spitting fire and thunder. The tribe gathered quickly, warriors sharpening spears, mothers clutching their young, the air filled with fear and rage. The tigress mother lifted her head and roared. Her voice cut across the valley like thunder. The tribe fell silent, looking to her. She was their leader, their protector, but tonight, even she knew the threat was greater than anything before. John's soldiers whispered nervously, rifles in hand. "We can't stay, sir." "We should pull back," one muttered. But John did not move. His eyes were on the cub pressed against his leg, and then on the tigress, her golden eyes glowing with fire. This was not just their fight anymore. It was his. The tigress stepped forward, lowering her head to him. Her rumble was sharp, her gaze hard. She did not speak words, but he understood. Fight with us or leave. Decide now. John's chest tightened. He looked at his soldiers, tired men who only wanted to go home. Then he looked at the cub, innocent and trusting. The memory of its tiny body curled in his arms, its purr against his chest. He could not walk away, not now, not ever. He pulled his rifle from his back and loaded a fresh magazine. His soldiers stared in shock. "Sir, you're not serious," one whispered. John's eyes were cold, steady. "We stand here," he said. "If we run, they die. If we fight, maybe they live." "That's enough." The tigress let out a deep roar in answer. The tribe echoed with cries, their spirits lifting for the first time. They did not see John as an outsider. They saw him as a warrior standing with them. The raiders arrived with fire and steel. Their machines thundered across the sand, but the battle was not one-sided. The tigress launched forward, a blur of muscle and fury. Her claws tore through metal, her roar shaking the dunes. The tribe fought like shadows, spears flashing, fangs biting, and John fought beside them, his rifle spitting fire into the night. The cub stayed hidden in the rocks, its eyes glowing as it watched. Every time John fell to one knee, the tigress covered him. Every time the tigress staggered, John's bullets tore through her enemies. It was not human versus alien. It was a family, fighting as one. The battle raged until dawn. The sand was stained dark. The air heavy with smoke, the raiders fled. Leaving broken machines behind, the tribe howled in victory, their voices echoing across the desert. John dropped to one knee, exhausted, his hands shook, his body bruised and bleeding. The cub rushed to him, pressing its small body against his chest. Its purr loud, full of joy and relief. John smiled weakly, stroking its fur. "You're safe. That's all that matters," he whispered. The tigress approached slowly. Her body scarred but unbroken. She stood before him. Her golden eyes locked onto his for a long moment. She said nothing, then lowering her head, she touched her nose to his forehead. A gesture not of threat, but of acceptance, a bond sealed forever. The tribe roared louder. The human was no longer outsider. He was blood, he was kin, he was one of them. John closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the first night, the starving cub behind the rock. The simple choice to share a ration bar, that choice had led to this. To battle, to survival, to family, he stood tall. His hand resting on the cub's head, the tigress at his side. His soldiers silent behind him, watching in awe. They had seen something impossible. A man and a beast standing as equals, bound by trust. The desert wind carried the scent of ash and dawn. The fight was over, but John knew the truth. This was not the end. Only the beginning. A final choice had been made, and he had chosen not to walk away, but to stay, to fight, to belong. As the sun rose high above the dunes, the tigress roared once more. The cub chirped, and John whispered softly, "From feeding a starving cub, I gained a family in the stars."